European Community envoy Lord Carrington and UN mediator Cyrus Vance were furious at Germany's foreign minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher. Vance would later call the conflict Mr. Genscher's War because of Germany's push to recognize separatists in Slovenia and Croatia.
Vance argued that recognition would take away the diplomatic leverage that he had to try to bring the conflict in Croatia to an end and could possibly result in Bosnia blowing up.
The former German foreign minister claimed that his government did not support the breakup of Yugoslavia until fighting began.
We held a strong position for the unity of Yugoslavia, as I said, but we saw that the will to keep it together vanished more and more under the pressure of military events.
In fact, however, since the 1960s, Germany's intelligence arm, the BND, was deeply involved in the training of Croatian separatists, led by the pro-Nazi Ustashi who fled to Germany after World War II, and participated in a number of terrorist actions against embassies and the government of Yugoslav communist leader Josip Broz Tito.
In the early 60s, the BND decided to cooperate fully with the Ustasha. This became plain to see after the so-called Croat Spring in the beginning of the 70s. After Tito's death, they accelerated their efforts, together with the Ustasha, in order to disintegrate Yugoslavia into several smaller states.
Germany's crucial role in supporting Croatian separatists is confirmed by Anton Duhacek, the former director of Yugoslav counterintelligence, who was himself a Croat.
The Germans wanted an absolute and complete subordination of Croatian intelligence that would carry out all that the Germans wanted. And the Germans promised that this would be in the interest of the future independent, free Croatia.
But Germany provided not only diplomatic support, but also weapons, even after an international arms embargo.
And I wrote a story about it, which was called The Blockade's a Joke. And so I went and started checking the ports, like Split and the ports along the Dalmatian coast. And as best I could, checking the stuff that was coming across the borders. And there was no limitations.
We saw a Croatian MiG-21 shot down in the Krajina, which the Croatians said came from former Yugoslav Air Force stocks. In fact, it was clearly from East German Air Force stocks. It had the East German radar warning receivers on board. So we know that these weapons are coming from the former East German stocks, so that they're, if you like, slightly disguised in the sense that they don't look like West German weapons, but they are coming from West Germany, obviously with the West German government's blessing. There can be no other way in which heavy weapons can be supplied like this.
Roy Gutman's journalistic standards and use of second-hand witnesses was questioned in a well-documented investigative article by journalist Thomas Deichmann in the German publication Die Woche. Much of Gutman's information came from Jadranka Cigelj, a Croatian woman from Prijedor. Cigelj was an official of a German-based front group for a variety of neo-fascist organizations, including the German Nationalist Party and the present political arm of the old World War II Ustashi. Jadranka Cigelj's accounts of rape and mayhem by Bosnian Serb forces attracted much media attention in the West, including from ABC anchorman Peter Jennings.
Omarska. There, many of the prisoners were tortured. The women were raped. One of the women was Jadranka Cigelj.
But crucial details kept changing in her accounts of events at Omarska and Prijedor.
If you look at Roy Gutman's article about her, she blames the camp commander in Omarska, a guy called Zirko Mejahic, as having raped her. And she blames tells another few names as well. But in other eyewitness reports, she accuses different Serbs having raped her in Omarska, which again raises questions about her credibility. It became clear that she tells different stories to different people, and that raised for me quite important questions about the role of the media and the question about the sources you're going to use.
The War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague, which investigated these charges, came to a similar conclusion, when they declined to use Ziegel to testify on events she claimed to have witnessed. Canadian UN officers identified an ethnic Albanian commander, Agim Ceku, as responsible for the massacre of Serbian civilians.
Our officers, Colonel Leslie, General Forand, that were there on the ground, wanted indictments against the artillery commander in particular, the commander of the operation, and even wanted Tudjman, the Croatian president, indicted for his role.
Emma Bonino, refugee commissioner for the European Union, noted that as many as 10,000 Serbian civilians were missing from the stream of refugees who fled the Croatian attack on the Krajina. Many of these ended up in mass graves.
When you will go to the villages, you will see on the cemeteries the graves without any names. Mostly it's 90%. Sometimes when I'm thinking about what happened there, I think also about the role of the Americans in preparing of our army. So I really don't know how they educate our soldiers, but if it is the education for democracy, they educate very bad.
Well, I don't think that the American people have drawn that correlation of those incredible war crimes that happened recently in the Krajina and the fact that the Croatian army was trained and advised by and virtually almost led by former American military leadership.
They have, in fact, been accomplice to a massive ethnic cleansing of Serbs from Croatia who had lived there for many, many centuries. It was their home. I think we need to step back and be representative of principle because we not only deny our own principles that way, but we create more problems than we solve.
3 State Department sources told former New York Times reporter David Binder that the green light to undertake Operation Storm came from U.S. envoy Richard Holbrooke, who flew to Zagreb to meet with Croatian President Franjo Tudjman 2 days before the attack. At first, Holbrooke insisted that he tried to prevent Operation Storm, but in his memoir of the Dayton negotiations, Holbrooke acknowledged that he encouraged Operation Storm, which drove ethnic Serbs from their homes in the Krajina.
Read Holbrooke's memoirs. He writes he was encouraging the Croatian government in every way he could to move fast and hard to get them out.
Having blocked UN and European peace agreements to end the fighting in Bosnia, the Clinton administration encouraged a joint military offensive by Muslim and Croat forces in western Bosnia. Like Operation Storm, the offensive was designed to force Serbian civilians from their homes, the very ethnic cleansing the administration had once denounced. In his book, To End a War, Richard Holbrooke writes that he even advised Croatian forces which Bosnian Serb cities to attack. Those attacks produced nearly as many refugees as Operation Storm and an unknown number of mass graves in western Bosnia. The following year, after the Dayton Accords were signed, a mass grave of Serbian civilians at Mrkonjić Grad was unearthed. At the time of its discovery in 1996, it was the largest mass grave the war had produced in Bosnia. By the time the war started, the German public had already been prepared by the repeated attacks on the Serbs in an influential German newspaper in Frankfurt. The strident commentary of Johann Georg Reismüller, which favored Croatia and reviled the Serbs, any Serbs, all Serbs, reminded Peter Handke of the way Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels once characterized the Jewish race.
It was the German press, in the form par excellence of the right-wing Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and its journalists that fundamentally influenced German policy.
German support for Croatian separatists received an unusual tribute, a musical thank you on Croatian state television. Serbian television broadcast Croatia's musical thank you, interspersed with World War II footage of cheering Croatian crowds in Zagreb welcoming Hitler's troops.
In the post-Cold War period, Germany wanted once again, the evidence is very clear, to recolonize Yugoslavia, to recolonize the Balkans. And the United States tied itself to German policy through its need of German power and influence in stabilizing Eastern Europe, Western Europe, through the exercise of dominion via the European Community, now the European Union, and potentially, eventually, in the lands of the former Soviet Union. The problem was that there was one very important country standing in the way of this. And
New York Times columnist A.M. Rosenthal would write, "In World War II, Hitler had no executioners more willing, no ally more passionate than the fascists of Croatia. They are returning from 50 years ago from what should have been their eternal grave, the defeat of Nazi Germany." Adolf Hitler considered Yugoslavia to be an artificial creation of the hated Versailles Treaty, which ended World War I. To break it up, he set up a puppet state, an enlarged Croatia, which also included Bosnia-Herzegovina. As its leader, he appointed the fanatical Croat Ustashi Ante Pavelić. Pavelić had helped plot the assassination of King Alexander, Yugoslavia's first constitutional monarch, in Marseille, France in 1934.
And it was the Germans, the German Nazis, who picked out this dreadful Ustashi leader who had made quite clear that he favoured Hitler's solution to be applied, which Hitler's his final solution for the Jews he wanted to apply to the Serbs, so he made no secret of it.
Simon Wiesenthal, who tracked Ustashi fugitives for decades, along with other Nazi war criminals, told an interviewer,
"I must admit I am obsessed by the criminal character of the independent state of Croatia. Even the Germans were appalled by the crimes committed in it."
How many men, women, and children died there? Hitler's special envoy to the Balkans, Hermann Neubacher, wrote, "Leaders of the Ustashi boast that they have slaughtered 1 million Orthodox Serbs. On the basis of official German reports, I estimate the number to be 750,000. Most of these Serbian civilians perished in the notorious Croatian death camp Jasenovac, which straddled the Sava River between Croatia and Bosnia. The extermination of Serbs, Jews, and Gypsies in Sarajevo was the task of top Muslim leaders who, with few exceptions, collaborated with Hitler and the Croatians.
There was in occupied Bosnia, also under German patronage, a strong Muslim wing which was very anti-Western. It was represented internationally by the Mufti of Jerusalem. You heard of his viciously anti-Western views, and he was brought to Sarajevo and mobbed by enthusiastic crowds.
After the war ended, Croatia and Bosnia were never denazified. Not only were there no apologies to the Serbs, Jews, and Gypsies, but attitudes remained frozen under the surface of Tito's official policy of socialist fraternity amongst peoples. Following the death of Yugoslavia's longtime leader, Tito, in 1980, right-wing émigré organizations took out an advertisement on the opinion page of the New York Times, stating that Yugoslavia would not survive, and offering a map which included all of Bosnia as part of Croatia. It was a map nearly identical to the Nazi-created independent state of Croatia. By 1990, as communism was collapsing in Eastern Europe, Croatian separatists pinned their hopes on a former communist general named Franjo Tuđman, who had been jailed for excessive nationalism by Tito in the 1970s.
You know, I met him very soon after he came out of communist jail, while Tito was still alive. He had then championed the racialist, nationalist form of nationalism. And when he came out of prison, instead of doing what you would think a dissident would do and say, to hell with the communists, he said, oh, well, it has nothing to do with the regime. It's those horrible Serbs who are oppressing us, and the Serbs are responsible for everything, and the Serbs are guilty, and the Serbs have done it all.
Tuđman received important help from outside of Croatia in his rise to power.
The German Secret Service was enormously active in Croatia and in all of Yugoslavia, trying in the 80s to build bridges between what were called the national communists, Stipe Mesić, Franjo Tuđman, in Yugoslavia, and the Ustasha revanchist organizations which lived in the diaspora of Croatia, that is to say, all of the people of weight and influence who had fled the former Nazi puppet state in 1945.
Tudjman found it useful to come to terms with them, and because he was running on this xenophobic platform, there was really no difficulty about it. What was difficult was when he was trying to sell his cause in the West, and he managed to, partly because he had a very good lobby, very effective and much more effective than the Serbian lobby, and partly because he covered up his intentions.
Tudjman often embarrassed his most important supporters, such as German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. For instance, Tudjman had written a book minimizing the crimes of the Ustashi and claiming that the Holocaust was greatly exaggerated. "Thank God my wife is neither a Serb nor a Jew," he told one interviewer. For the national flag, Tudjman chose a replica of the checkerboard emblem that flew over the Croatian death camps of World War II, where Serbs, Jews, and Gypsies were exterminated. Tudjman's anti-Semitic views were covered beneath rhetoric acceptable to the West. With the help of Reuter and Finn, a high-powered American public relations firm, the New York Times found space for General Tudjman's new and misleading image on its opinion page. In the article, Tudjman promised that there would be no purges against the Serbian population in Croatia if it separated from Yugoslavia.
Tudjman declared that Croatia was for the Croats. That was his slogan, a racialist slogan. Croatia for the Croats, with the implication people who weren't Croats, and there was a very substantial Serb and Yugoslav mixed variety, didn't feel that they were in fact second-class citizens, and he recognized them as such.
A full 6 months before fighting broke out, Serbs were purged from positions in government, news organizations, and the police. Their homes were dynamited in cities such as Zagreb, Zadar, and Dubrovnik. For the first time since World War II, Serbs in eastern Croatia began to flee across the Danube River.
The Serbs working in Croatian cities were required to sign loyalty oaths. Those who did not sign were fired. Those who did sign were fired later. Serb homes, apartments, and businesses were attacked.
Predsjednik Republike Hrvatske, gospodin Franjo Tuđman, dao nam je odobrenje da po prvi put formiramo nenaoružane odrede civilne zaštite Hrvatske demokratske zajednice.
Any doubt that Tudjman himself issued orders for the expulsion of Serbs in Croatia was removed by Tomislav Merčep, a senior member of Tudjman's ruling party, the HDZ. Merčep would later be identified by Croatian police reports as one of 2 Croatian leaders who directed death squads that murdered hundreds of Serbian civilians in eastern Slavonia around Vukovar and Osijek in the fall of 1991. He received little press coverage in the West, but Merčep was, in many ways, the spark that set the fire of war in Slavonia, a disputed region of Croatia where the Yugoslav war began. Merčep's co-leader of the Croatian death squads was Branimir Glavaš of Osijek. Unlike more discreet members of the ruling HDZ party, Glavaš made no secret of his identification with the World War II Croatian Ustashi as he welcomed returning Croatian prisoners of war. While some French intellectuals were hailing Croatia as part of the new Europe, old and familiar forces were at work. Osijek became a magnet for neo-fascist groups fighting with Glavaš. They included British skinheads, German and Austrian neo-fascists, and followers of the French extremist Jean-Marie Le Pen.
C'est comme ça que l'on bâtit l'Europe nationaliste.
Et vous y allez directement après, demain?
Oui, demain nous partons pour Zagreb pour prendre des ordres à l'état-major, mais pas de l'armée croate régulière. Nous allons avec la force de défense croate qui dépend du parti du droit croate, et donc nous partirons quelque part sur le front en Slavonie, je suppose.
The United States, which soon adopted Germany's approach to the Balkans, ignored recent history and offered a simple explanation for the fighting which broke out in the predominantly Serbian region of Croatia, which was known as the Krajina. Assistant Secretary of State Richard Holbrooke, who spent the early years of the Yugoslav war as the American ambassador to Germany, represented what became the official American view.
The Serbs started this war. The Serbs are the original cause of the war.
Those who tried to prevent the war saw it differently.
The Serbs in Croatia, and indeed outside Croatia, had a very vivid memory of what happened in 1941-42, when Hitler declared Croatia as an independent puppet state, if you like, and the horrors that went on there and the murders of the Serbs were still very, I mean, a very large number of Serbs were murdered at that time. I mean, hundreds of thousands. And I think it was very understandable that when Croatia declared its independence and promulgated a new constitution without any safeguard for the 600,000 Serbs who still lived in Croatia, the Serbs were very perturbed about it.